You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, now let's go into part 5 of the Gilded Age. And now that we have come to appreciate the nature of conflict between capital and labor, now let's visit the farmer. Now, let's remember the farmer. If you take a look at the textbook is sharing with you that the American dream is rooted in the farm. And that American dream somehow went haywire on the eve of the Civil War. Now, the family farm, that is a goal of workers. Everyone desires a farm. Why? Because you become your own boss. You do not have to work for somebody else. You're working for yourself. So the goal that workers desired in order to escape the clutches of the industrial boss was the farm. Now, something's going to happen to the farm while the workers are experiencing the violence of the Gilded Age. Let's talk about the populist revolt. Now, Howard Zinn, in A People's History of the United States, passionately relays what happened to the farmer during the Gilded Age. Machines changed farming. Farming became a capital investment. And farming required skill, capital, loans, and credit. So a farmer's income became erratic. Farming became mechanized. You need steel plows, mowing machines, reapers, harvesters, improved cotton gins. Land costs money. Machines cost money. So farmers had to borrow, hoping the prices of their harvest would stay high so they could pay the bank for the loan, turn around and pay the railroad for the transportation, and then pay the grain merchant for handling and the elevator for storing. So the farmers had hoped that their prices for their harvest would stay high. But what happened was that farmers found that the prices for their produce was going down, and the prices for their transportation, their prices for their loans were going up. Meanwhile, bankers and railroad interests were monopolizing the markets. And so they began to charge what they liked. So farmers who couldn't pay their loans, who couldn't pay the banks, who couldn't afford the grain elevator, who couldn't afford the grain merchant, who couldn't pay the railroad, who couldn't pay the banks, they lost their homes. They lost their land. And they became tenants. Howard Zinn says that by 1880, 25% of all farms are going to be rented by tenants, and that number kept rising. Today, if you take a look at farms, not even 5% of farms in the U.S. are owned by individuals. But back then, a lot of the farmers didn't even have money to rent. So they became Mexicans. They became farm workers, farm laborers. So that by 1900, it is estimated that 4.5 million farm workers were in this country, where they used to own land. They are now working. It was the fate that awaited every farmer who could not pay his debts. Now, the government is going to play its part in helping the bankers and hurting the farmers. The government kept the amount of money based on the gold supply steady while the population soared. So when you have the gold supply, the money supply steady, you have less money in circulation as the population rises, there's going to be less and less money in circulation. So the farmer who has to pay off his debts in dollars, those dollars are going to be harder to get. And so the bankers who are getting the loans back, they're getting dollars that were worth more than when they loaned them out. Howard Zinn calls this a kind of interest on top of interest. That is why back then there was so much talk of farmers' movements that had to do with putting more money in circulation by printing greenbacks, paper money for which there was no gold in the treasury, or by making silver the basis for issuing money. So the first farmers' alliances are going to begin in Texas. And basically, it was arguments against what is known as the crop lien system. And the crop lien system was most brutal. Now, the system goes like this. The farmer is going to get the things that he needs from the merchant. Use of the cotton gin, whatever supplies. And since the farmer didn't have any money to pay, the merchant's going to get a lien, a mortgage on the farmer's crop, on which the farmer might pay 25% interest. So historians write that this system became for millions of Southerners, white and black, little more than a modified form of slavery. The farmer is going to owe more money every year until finally the farm was taken away and the family became tenants. If the male died, the family and the children inherited the debt. So the Granger movement and the farmers' alliances are going to spread new ideas. They're going to spread a spirit in the 1880s and 1890s. And eventually this movement for change is going to create one of the most challenging and crusades against the Democratic Party and against the Republican Party that this nation has ever witnessed. They're going to call themselves, as the advertisement shares here, the People's Party or the Populist Party. And the People's Party or the Populist Party is going to convene in an assembly in 1890 in Topeka, Kansas. Now, there was a statement that became most popular from the People's Party's most fiery speaker. It was a woman. Her name was Mary Elizabeth Lease. And this woman is very important because she went around the country defending farmers who were losing their lands. Mary Elizabeth Lease, or Mary Yelling Lease, as she became fondly known, reveals the extent of her frustration with the Democrats and the Republicans by giving a speech known as Wall Street Owns the Country. And in this speech, she was so fiery in her work that she argued that it is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. Her favorite phrases, or most important, I guess my favorite phrases are, "Our laws are the output of a system which clothes rascals in robes and honesty in rags." The politicians said we suffered from overproduction. Overproduction? When 10,000 little children starve to death every year in the U.S., and over 100,000 shop girls in New York are forced to sell their virtue for bread. There are 30 men in the United States whose aggregate wealth is over $1.5 billion. There are 500,000 looking for work. We want money, land, and transportation. We want the abolition of the national banks, and we want the power to make loans direct from the government. Excuse me. We want the cursed foreclosure system wiped out. We will stand by our homes and stay by our firesides, by force if necessary, and we will not pay our debts to the loan shark companies until the government pays its debts to us. The people are at bay. Let the bloodhounds of money who have dogged us this far beware. Well, that was my own broken way of trying to give honor to this woman who gave one of the most passionate speeches about the situation that most farmers and workers found themselves in. But let's go to and listen to an actress try to do a better job than I did in Mary Ellen Lease's great talk. Let's go to that documentary.
The mechanization of farming in the late 19th century forced small farmers to borrow money to pay rent for their equipment. When they could not pay, their farms were taken away. They began to organize, forming the populist movement of the 1880s and 1890s. Here are the words of one of his most important leaders, Mary Elizabeth Lease.
When was that, Anthony?
Well, it was 1890.
Thank you. This is a nation of inconsistencies. The Puritans, fleeing from oppression, became oppressors. We fought England for our liberty and put chains on 4 million of blacks. The great common people of this country are slaves, and monopoly is the master. Wall Street owns the country. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for... Money rules. Our laws are the output of a system which clothes rascals in robes and honesty in rags. The parties lie to us and the political speakers mislead us. We were told 2 years ago to go to work and raise a big crop. That was all we needed. We went to work and plowed and planted. The rains fell, the sun shone, nature smiled, and we raised the big crop that they told us to. And what came of it? 8-cent corn, 10-cent oats, 2-cent beef, and no price at all for butter and eggs. That's what came of it. Then the politicians said we suffered from overproduction. Overproduction? When 10,000 little children, so statistics tell us, starve to death every year in the United States of America. We want money, land, and transportation. We want the accursed foreclosure system wiped out. We still stand by our homes. We will not pay our debts to the loan shark companies until the government pays its debts to us. The people are at bay, so let the bloodhounds of money beware.
Okay, so when we take a look at the populists, they consisted of Southerners. These were tenants who lost their land, small landowners. And because in the South there was apartheid, there was segregation, there was a separate organization for blacks. It consisted of Midwest farmers. Most importantly, it consisted of elements in the labor movement. And this was the first important movement to insist that laissez-faire economics was not the solution to industrial problems, and that the federal government had a responsibility for the nation's social well-being. So the populists tried to unite farmers who were divided on racial barriers and create alliances between farmers and labor unions. And the first tests of solidarity were the Depression of 1894 and the election of 1896. The Depression of 1894 laid off workers. It cut wages. It closed factories. It created a rise in the unemployment ranks. It cut the operations of railroads, and it pinched farmers. So this depression engendered violence, and it encouraged many Democrats to cry out for populism. Meanwhile, Republicans called all populists and those Democrats supporting the populists as communists, as anarchists, as socialists, and nothing but unpatriotic American agitators who should be immediately deported. Now, the election of 1896 saw William Jennings Bryan representing the rural population and the plight of the urban worker pitted against William McKinley, a banking, shipping, coal, iron, and railway businessman who represented the millionaire boss. Let's go to a film clip from a famous movie and appreciate the significance of the populist moment.
And thank her. Come out, wherever you are, and meet the young lady who sends.
Isn't it just great? The munchkins, or the little people, are liberated from the wicked witch of the East, who represented the banking industry and Wall Street. This fictional land of Oz was created by an American author named L. Frank Baum and his illustrator, William Wallace Denslow. Now, economics and history professors have published scholarly studies that indicate that the images and characters used by Baum and Denslow closely resembled political images that were well known in the 1890s. The Scarecrow, Tin Man, Lion, like other characters in the Elements of the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, these were common themes found in editorial cartoons of the era. Baum and Denslow, like most writers, used the materials at hand that they knew best, and they built a story around them. They added Dorothy. They added a series of lessons to the effect that everyone possesses the resources that they need, brains, a heart, and courage, if only they had self-confidence. Now, it was a children's book, but Baum notes in the preface that it is a modernized fairy tale as well. So those who interpret The Wizard of Oz, they understand it to be a political allegory of the populist movement. Dorothy is the woman coming of age in America, hoping to represent all little people, the munchkins. The munchkins have no voice. Now, originally, the slippers were silver, not ruby. It represented the quest of the populace to make silver the basis for issuing money. The Wicked Witch of the East, the Wicked Witch of the East, who died as Annie M's house on her, as Annie M's house fell on her, and again, Annie M's house is the plight of the farmer losing their lands. The Wicked Witch of the East represented the banking industry. And boy, did those munchkins celebrate, knowing that the banks could no longer haunt them. The Wicked Witch of the West represented the railroads. You look at how labor and farmers struggle to survive as the railroads become known as the robber barons. Now, I know about the robber barons because I went to Stanford University, and Leland Stanford was a robber baron. The Scarecrow, he's a central figure. He's a reflection of the popular image of the second and third generation immigrant who had become a farmer. Now, he represents the idea of self-confidence and a willingness to organize politically. And this is the farmer, the Scarecrow. The Tin Man is the industrial worker who needs a heart to join the Scarecrow in demanding change. And then there's the Cowardly Lion. The Cowardly Lion is the politician who might be willing to speak up on behalf of the downtrodden if he has the courage to do so. The Yellow Brick Road represented the economy that was based on the gold standard. And remember, Dorothy's slippers are silver. The wizard himself is this great benevolent government who seems to manipulate every situation. And as the film clip shared with us, the banks were finally put out of commission, no longer threatening the people. So this sounds like a message for us today, given that the banks have taken the money and run. Now, to bring the Gilded Age to a conclusion, let's understand that in the 1890s, this protest against privilege and monopoly is ultimately going to be expressed in the assassination of the president at the turn of the century. Let's appreciate this. The president of the United States is going to be assassinated as the new century takes place. As the 20th century takes place, the president will be assassinated. And let's go and visit this and understand and appreciate this one woman named Emma Goldman. Now, Emma Goldman was an immigrant Russian woman. She was an anarcho-syndicalist. She espoused justice. She espoused liberty. But she did so against capitalist monopoly. She decided to take, a man listening to her voice, listening to her message, decided to take fate in his own hands and will symbolically eliminate the symbol of injustice. And the populist movement, as a result of this, became a moment, but it's going to transform, the movement's going to transform into something very important that we're going to talk about in the future presentations, known as progressive reform in the 20th century. But in the 19th century, as we move into the 20th century, we need to understand and appreciate that revolution engulfed the world. Wherever capitalism was expanding, where industrialization was expanding, it was uplifting, it was creating a situation where workers and farmers were being displaced. And it was galvanizing everybody into the political arena. So everyone was involved in trying to create a just society. Revolution engulfed the world. Now we're going to watch a film clip from a documentary that is required viewing for this class. And we're going to appreciate the importance of Emma Goldman and the significance of the assassination of President William McKinley. Emma Goldman was a brilliant orator who organized mass meetings and hunger demonstrations. She had an uncanny ability to generate strong passions. And she desired to do away with conditions that produced murderers. So let's go and we'll end the Gilded Age with Emma Goldman.
A year after Homestead, the United States was on the verge of economic collapse. 600 banks closed, 56 railroads went bankrupt, 15,000 companies shut down, and the number of unemployed soared from 800,000 to more than 3 million.
I think the Panic of 1893 is the most important phenomenon in the development of modern American history, and particularly modern American radicalism. The Depression leads to the discovery that industrialization is creating a gap between the rich and the poor, a chasm between the rich and the poor, and that it's very dangerous, and it's very unsafe, and it's very unfair, and it's very unpatriotic.
Goldman helped organize mass meetings and hunger demonstrations. On August 21st, 1893, she led a march of 1,000 to New York's Union Square, carrying a red banner.
Go into the streets where the rich dwell. Ask for work. If they do not give you work, ask for bread. If they do not give you work or bread, then take bread.
You want bread? Go and take it. You're starving? Go and take it. Make restaurants feed you. Make bakeries give you food. And she'd been very powerful to the extent that people had been very, very impressed by her oratory and her power.
Just 24, Goldman was already recognized as a professional agitator. Her talk of insurrection, of doing without government, of encouraging the unemployed to take matters into their own hands, of thousands of workers going door to door demanding food, was terrifying to authorities. She was arrested and charged with inciting to riot.
Anarchism is an immensely exciting, poetic, intoxicating, fantastical idea, and so of course she scared the shit out of people. I mean, yeah, and she intended to.
I think what made her so scary to those people to whom she was scary, and probably is exactly what made her appealing to those people who found her appealing, which is that she was an incredibly free spirit.
She's in the public eye, she's famous, she's notorious. She's often referred to as the famous anarchist. She's visible. And there's something about that that she enjoys, but there's something about that it also is politically important, because it's also a way to talk about anarchism.
Goldman was sentenced to 1 year in prison. She used the time to educate herself, reading Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman. She also trained as a nurse. When she was released in the summer of 1894, Goldman was met by a crowd of 2,800. She told them she'd been imprisoned for talking. She would soon begin talking again, this time about psychological repression and Sigmund Freud. She began speaking about marriage, female emancipation, and sex.
Emma Goldman was the big boogeyman of 20th century America. Especially since you combine this danger of being militant and volatile, out of control, and prone for violence with this doctrine of free love that people in the mind associate with also free sex. So this combination of violence and sex was very titillating, very interesting.
I demand the independence of woman, her right to support herself, to live for herself, to love whomever she pleases, or as many as she pleases. I demand freedom for both sexes, freedom of action, freedom in love, and freedom in motherhood.
She was totally unacceptable. Not just to the status quo, not just to the bureaucrats, but to the progressive people, to the educated people, to everybody.
She was aware of her ability to generate strong passions. You cheer for me, you follow me, she told a reporter in the spring of 1901. But you'd hang me if your mood changed. In May 1901, Goldman gave a lecture entitled The Modern Phase of Anarchy, an incendiary talk on political assassination and the glory of martyrdom. Leon Czolgosz, a young would-be anarchist, sat in the audience listening attentively. 4 months later, at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, Czolgosz worked his way through the crowd and shot President William McKinley twice in the chest at point-blank range.
Czolgosz told the authorities that Emma Goldman had set him on fire when he went to hear her speak. And this immediately led to a condemnation of Goldman throughout the country. She was actually in danger of her life, and it led to the arrest of any anarchist or any perceived radical police could get their hands on.
Goldman was arrested and interrogated. After the death of McKinley, and after authorities failed to turn up evidence connecting her to the assassination, she was released. To the horror of a grief-stricken public, she threw herself into an impassioned defense of Leon Czolgosz.
As an anarchist, I am opposed to violence. But if people want to do away with assassins, they must first do away with the conditions which produce murderers.
Goldman's defense of Czolgosz, I think, very much damaged the anarchist movement, but it damaged it in the sense of, once again, going back to the central question of, were anarchists for violent overthrow of the government or not? This is the trail, the thread that leads constantly through anarchism's debate over just what it was and how it intended to bring about its utopia.
To my mind, there's no question that she